there's a beautiful park called Raven Run where you can walk along the creek, and there's a Kentucky River overlook, which is beautiful. And I was trying to decide which way to hike, and I was looking at the map, even though I've been in the park many times. But I looked up, and as I was determining which trail to take, I saw the sign that said, "You are here."
Mm.
And I thought, "Oh, oh, that's the title." And then I thought, "Oh, also, I am here." Here I was, totally in my mind, completely only thinking and obsessing about this project and what I could do and how I could do it well and how I could be of service to both poetry and the natural world. And I wasn't actually noticing anything that was around me at all.
Mm.
So I thought, oh, it's not only the title, but it's also a mantra.
Welcome. You are listening to Our Mindful Nature, formerly titled The Mindful Minute. I'm your host, Meryl Arnett. This podcast explores the deep connection between land and self through nature-based meditations and meditative experiences that invite us back into belonging to each other, to our ancestors, to the earth, and to all beings that make up this universe. If you would like to access these meditation practices as standalone audio files, please subscribe to my newsletter at merylarnett.com. It's free, and you'll receive a new mini meditation each week, along with behind-the-scenes content and bonus material for each podcast episode. All right, grab a cup of tea, pop in your headphones, and find a comfy seat. Let's settle in for today's episode. Welcome, y'all. Thanks for tuning in today. I have got a bucket list conversation for you today. Today, we are talking with U.S. Poet Laureate and fellow meditator, Ada Limón. Ada Limón is my personal favorite poet. And the reason I'm talking to her today, aside from the fact that I love her, is her U.S. Poet Laureate signature project, which is titled You Are Here, Poetry in Parks. And when I read about the project and the associated anthology of poems that she released under the same name, You Are Here, I was so moved by the thoughtful and poignant connection between nature, poetry, and presence. And as listeners know, that's the conversation I'm here to have, right? I want to talk about what it means to be present, what it means to engage with the natural world around us as ourselves, as nature ourselves, right? So this conversation is packed, quite honestly, with hope, with reflection points, with questions that really don't have answers, actually. And of course, poetry. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. What you'll hear threaded throughout is a conversation about the natural world, layered with what it means to be mindful, what it means to be awake and here. Ada shares the story of where she came up with the title, You Are Here, for this project. And as you'll hear, we both were sort of like, how have we not thought of this sooner? So lots of fun moments. It was such a pleasure for me. I hope it is such a pleasure for you to listen to. Without any further ado, let's listen in. Ada, it's such a pleasure to get to sit and chat with you today. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Mhm. I'm really, really excited to talk to you about You Are Here,
Mm.
Poetry in Parks, the anthology. And I thought maybe we would just start if you could share a little bit. I'm so curious how this became the project. Is there a story behind it? What sparked the idea for you? I'd love to know the origins.
Yeah, thank you for asking. You know, not every poet laureate does a signature project, but they ask you, would you be interested in doing something? We'd love to know what your project is about. And I knew that I wanted to do something with poetry and nature, but I didn't know I didn't know what that would look like.
Mm.
Um, and I had many different thoughts, and some of them were maybe as outlandish as flying a plane with poems on native seed packets that would then sprout into flowers and native plants that would reforest and
Mm.
reclaim land that had been burned from wildfires or from industrial farming, something um that seemed like a little too large of an idea for the Library of Congress, which is rightly so. I understand. Maybe a few insurance issues that would come up. Um, so once I started thinking about, like, how do we create an idea of connection to the natural world through poetry? And immediately we thought about the national parks,
Mm.
and we thought about what is it to put poems in the national parks so that it could give people a moment of reflection, to sit and think and be present in a place that sometimes you've driven to, sometimes you have your whole family with you, sometimes it's part of a plan to see all the parks and to get your nature quotient in. Um, but what is it to feel very present, to feel um, like you're more able to receive the landscape?
Mm.
And so that became an initial part of the project. But then I also thought about all the people who couldn't go to the national parks, whether they didn't have the freedom, the finance, the physical ability. And I thought, well, there is something about intentional nature, which is so beautiful, right? We plan for it. We think, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to have a moment of peace, etc. But then there's something else about the everyday nature, the nature that we have access to all the time, the nature that's outside our windows, the by the bus stop. And I wanted to honor that too, and the many different ways that we are nature. And so that's when I came up with the second part of the project, which is called You Are Here Poetry in the Natural World. And that's poems. That's 50 original contemporary poems um, that speak back to the natural world. And that to me really served as a counterbalance to the more sort of thoughtful, planned trip that would include the national parks. And instead, the encounter with nature that happens when you first open your eyes and realize that you're breathing in what the trees offer you. So I thought that was for me how the poem really, or how the project really started to come into a sense of wholeness.
Mm.
Um, and so that's a little bit of the origin story. I think the third element really is that people can participate, and that was another part that I was
Mm.
really intrigued by, was how does this project serve not only as a way to connect to nature, to connect to poetry, to reflect and to receive, but also where can it be an invitation?
I one of the things that really jumped out at me just in the introduction that you wrote to the anthology,
Mm,
I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it directly in front of me, but it was something about, you want to write or you want us to write poems and save trees, and poems feel small in the face of the urgency of climate crisis.
mhm,
And I feel, I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that so potently every day, all day, there's so many huge crises and I am so small. And
Mhm.
is there anything I can do? Probably not. It's better just to close the laptop, close my eyes, not feel anything, and like be
Mhm.
busy at work.
Mhm.
And what I sense in reading through these poems, and I got to be at one of the national parks as you were unveiling one of these beautiful poems. What I really have been sitting with is this remembrance of how powerful something small is in
Mm.
our own, just as you said, like outside of our door in our own community, that sense of wakefulness and
Mm.
connectedness. Um, I really sense that invitation in the
Mm.
work.
Mm. I love that, because I do feel like the systems and structures that are existing are set up for us to feel like we can't do anything.
Yeah.
Like that's what they rely upon in order to be self-sustaining, is that we rely or they rely on the idea that to have hope is hard. To think a singular action is powerful, right? Um, is not allowed. And so I think, part of the project is to really let us reimagine
Mm.
um, some possibilities. I think a lot about that we have so many tools, but what we have is a failure to imagine that the systems and structures will let us use them.
Mm.
And I think that I'm just beginning to question what it is to imagine different ways, what it is to imagine possibilities. And I think that collectively we need to start doing that. And, what if this is a time where we're given this problem in order to rise to it?
Mm.
And yeah, it's much easier to numb out. It's much easier to, doom scroll, uh, or to really turn on each other,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
To think, how could you care about a tree when there's so many other things to care about? Um, but really, caring about the planet is caring about everything.
Yeah.
You know, it's recognizing that nature is also humanity, and it's caring about everyone's survival.
Mm.
That great quote by Robin Wall Kimmerer, the great thinker and poet and writer, where she says all flourishing is mutual. And I think that we've grown up and been raised and through generations in a society where we think about someone else's flourishing means someone else's demise.
Mm.
And I just think it's time to reimagine possibilities around that.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And one of the lines that jumped out at me in your writing was nature is not just a place to visit.
Mm,
Nature is who we are,
mm,
right? And that thought, I mean, we that thought is replicated in so many meditation lineages
mm,
and through science and through poetry and through, I mean, that thought I feel like exists in a way that I think many of us say, "Oh, sure, I've heard that before." And
mhm,
then when we pause long enough to say, "If that's true,
mhm.
what does that mean?
What
What
does that mean?
how do I move? What choices do I make if
Mhm.
that is true?" And I
Yep.
feel that invitation in all of I mean, the poems in this anthology are incredible,
Thank
and
you. They're so
they're
beautiful.
so beautiful.
Yeah, the poets
So
just
oh,
they really just I mean, I would weep when they would come through and they're amazing.
yeah. And they ask us to step into that question, right?
Mhm, mhm,
If this is true, What how do I move?
Yeah.
How do I interact?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does that mean for, what does that mean for our future? And what does that mean as we move forward with big decisions in terms of how we move forward collectively? And I just feel like for so long, we've been told that there's only one end.
Mm.
Um, and what if we don't accept that? You know,
Yeah.
I for one am very curious about what would happen if we don't accept what we've been told as the only end to this planetary story.
Mm. Yeah. Um, when I read you share a little story, and maybe you'll share it for us here, of the title.
Mm,
I'm staring at a little trail marker,
yeah.
and I had this moment of being like, I'm a little embarrassed that I'm a meditation teacher and that never occurred to me. Like, that's amazing. And I hate that I didn't notice it myself. So thank you for calling it out for us. Will you share that
Yeah.
invitation for all of us?
I mean, as someone who has practiced meditation, for 14 years now or whatever it's been, um, I felt sort of similarly like, "Oh, how is this the first time I'm thinking of it?" But, when I was trying to name this project, I had the sort of the concepts down, the intention. It hadn't been, really fleshed out, but it was there. I was looking for a unifying factor, a theme for it that would bring it together. Um, and I went for a little hike in Raven Run, in Kentucky. Uh, we lived in Lexington, Kentucky. We still go back and forth. My husband's there right now. And there's a beautiful park called Raven Run where you can walk along the creek, and there's a Kentucky River overlook, which is beautiful. And I was trying to decide which way to hike, and I was looking at the map, even though I've been in the park many times. But I looked up, and as I was determining which trail to take, I saw the sign that said, "You are here."
Mm.
And I thought, "Oh, oh, that's the title." And then I thought, "Oh, also, I am here." Here I was totally in my mind, completely only thinking and obsessing about this project and what I could do and how I could do it well and how I could be of service to both poetry and the natural world. And I wasn't actually noticing anything that was around me at all.
Mm.
So I thought, oh, it's not only the title, but it's also a mantra. Like it's also, I actually have to think about it right now and be here and let myself go on this walk and notice things and not just work out problems in my mind. Um,
Mm.
and it was such a gift. So I thought, oh, this has arrived at the right time. And um and now I see it all the time. And I love it because I was, underneath when we unveiled the poem at Redwoods National and State Parks. I was standing in front of this beautiful tree called the big tree, the big redwood tree. And right underneath it, it says, "You are here."
Wow. Mm.
And once you notice it, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, yeah, it became, of course, this is the title.
Right. I love that as a mantra, and I have
Mm.
noticed that I have been saying it to myself
Mm,
even as I just move through whatever's happening in the day as
yeah.
you are here. I am
Mhm,
here. And then if I can, I just want to draw the thread back to what you were saying just before we were talking about the title, which is this idea of making the assumption that there's just this one ending, right? And our
mhm,
brain is there. It's all so far forward of what's going to happen, what am I going to do? What does this look like? Whose fault is it?
mhm,
And then you give us this mantra, I'm right here.
mhm,
I'm right here. And
mhm.
we get to sort of hold both of those experiences together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like I mean, meditation offers that all the time, right? The sense of presence, the sense of breath, the moment. Um, and yet poetry can offer that in some ways as well, that sense of breath and presence.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the same thing that the natural world offers, a sense of breath and presence. And so to me, they're all really connected. And the project is hoping, in its intention that it allows people that moment, just like you had. Um, because I don't know how many times I've been on a walk or even in a meditation where I have gone so far. And so, almost I always feel like you sit down to meditate and you think, wait, is my brain always doing this?
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, it actually is. It's always doing this. I don't notice it until I am quiet and I'm like, oh, here we are. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that it's a weird moment where it feels like we're not even we're s- to have hope is naive. Um, there's so many articles. I remember the one, yeah, I won't mention his name, but by a well-known writer that was basically like, oh, this is, we're all doomed and all you can do is just live your life in a small way or whatever. And of course did not take into account the many people who would be affected first by the climate crisis. Um, but I'm also like, well, what if there's more that we can do? And there are a lot of really smart, wise, caring people that are doing quite a bit. I think about
Mm.
the Salgados in Brazil, right? Who planted 2 million trees. 2 million trees. They had volunteers and, you know, people would come out and they went from a land that was essentially dead to a land that was a living, breathing ecosystem. And now, of course, a new forest is very different than an ancient forest and all of those things. We need to keep our ancient forests. We can't just plant trees.
Yes, yes.
But there are people doing those great things, and I think it's we don't get to hear those stories very often because they don't get as many clicks.
Mm.
They don't get as much. They don't rise to the top of our narrative, um, and so they're easily dismissed.
Yeah.
And you know, at one point we were driving home from the Great Smoky Mountains where we unveiled the beautiful Lucille Clifton poem. And
Mm.
my friend who's the representative for the Library of Congress was like, oh, but I really wanted to, we had this beautiful talk afterwards. And with, folks from different native tribes and really just an incredible small group discussion. And he said, I really wanted to know about how poetry is used in the parks and, like, he was being very on task.
Mm.
And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I mean, it's definitely about poetry in the parks and it's definitely about poetry and presence in the natural world. I said, but really, isn't it all about how we can come together to reimagine our future? Like, isn't it even larger than that? Like, aren't our goals more expansive? And he was like, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, I know we want to be task oriented. We want to have, receipts. But what is it just to be a spark too?
Yeah.
Permission to hope, permission to not just receive the world, but to offer something back. And in doing so, recognizing that we are in a reciprocal relationship with the natural world. And therefore, you can't be lonely, even if
Mm.
you're alone, because we're moving together. Anyway, that's it. You could
It's
talk about it forever, but
I would love to talk to you forever about that. This is like the conversation I am here to have. I love that. And one of the things, so listeners, my family, my husband, my 2 kids, and I got in the car. We drove to the Great Smokies. It's like maybe 3 hours from Atlanta, for this unveiling. And we day trip up to the Smokies a lot, actually. We're so lucky to live close enough to get to do that. And so, we packed our picnic. We're going to do this. We're going to go here. We're going to do this thing. And we got there and I was like, I had like, if the kids don't want to sit, you're going to go take them and do this thing. Right. And then there were so many children there.
Mhm,
There were so many children.
mhm,
There were so many people, some of whom I chatted with, and they were like, we didn't even know this was happening. We just like
yeah,
saw it and sat down. And other people were like us and had come a distance. You had a Spanish interpreter, you had an ASL interpreter. As you mentioned, you had representatives from some of the indigenous tribes around us. It was so inclusive
mm,
and warm
mm,
feeling to say, and we were just outside. We were just in this, tented area in a park
yeah. By a river.
by a river. It was
Mhm,
beautiful. And what I felt was included, right?
mhm,
I felt a part of whatever this, and people were smiling and nodding and making eye contact. I chatted with the people in line around me.
mhm,
And that's not an experience we have every day anymore.
mm-mm,
But it's not, there's so many times you go someplace, you don't make eye contact, you don't talk. That inclusivity piece to this project is so, and then even if I remember correctly, you saying the picnic tables, so they're these beautiful picnic tables with the poems engraved, they're handicap accessible,
yeah,
and they have a prompt on them
mhm,
for us,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
for the person that sits down to eat their peanut butter and jelly
mhm,
sandwich. There's a
yeah,
prompt. I love
yeah. I'm so glad you brought all that up because I feel like it's really important to think about the intentional, nature of a project and then how does it unfold. And, one of the things that I was so impressed by is that, the national parks themselves have done an incredible job.
Mm,
Um, you not only milkweed with the anthology, but the national parks and Harper's Ferry design team were the ones who were like, no, it has to be elongated on one side so that we can include someone who is in a wheelchair and they're all at the same level,
mm,
and that the table will come out to meet them. And I was just like, yes, thank you for thinking of that. And I have many friends and family members that are in chairs, and that just to me was just so moving and wonderful. Um, and the prompt, goes along with my idea that I wanted the project to be an invitation. And, the prompt is, what would you write in response to the landscape around you? And the prompt doesn't have to be, if you can't go to the national park and you can't read the prompt on a picnic table, the prompt can be looking out your window in your high rise in New York City. It could be whatever it is that you want to respond to the landscape around you. And I'm hoping that it gives some kind of permission and allowance for anyone who wants to write and respond in whatever way possible. They could write the poem and send it to a friend, or they could just write it in their mind, um, say it out loud in a whisper. There's a hashtag you can share it, although I have my suspicions often about social media, but there is a hashtag, which is You Are Here Poetry, and I do check it. So if you want to
mm,
share your poems, I'll look at it. Um, and, I just wanted for anyone, and they could be a sentence, doesn't even have to be a poem. What is it that you would say back? What is it that you would write back? Um, because I wanted to highlight the idea of making an offering
mm.
back to not just the beautiful places that are sacred and protected, but also the places that we pass every day, that may go unnoticed or unsung.
Mm. Yes. Ada, I want to be mindful of time. And I would love to ask, maybe as a way to wrap up,
Mm.
if you would share a poem with us
I would
of your
love to.
choice, of your
Yes, I would
choice.
love to. Um, in this poem, um, because it's a poem for trees,
Mm.
and sanctuary. Suppose it's easy to slip into another's green skin, bury yourself in leaves, and wait for a breaking open, a breaking out. I have before been tricked into believing I could be both an eye and the world. The great eye of the world is both gaze and gloss, to be swallowed by being seen, a dream, to be made whole by being not a witness, but witnessed.
Thank you so much. I loved getting to chat with you today. Your project is such a gift for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for listening to Our Mindful Nature. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving me a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find the show, and let's face it, we could all use a few more meditators in our lives. Our Mindful Nature is recorded on Muskogee land and produced with the support of Brianna Nielsen. Deep gratitude is offered to acoustic ecologists Gordon Hempton and Nick McMahon for the use of their nature field recordings in many of these episodes. To join my live classes, ask questions, or learn about my teacher trainings, please visit merylarnett.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.